Today I want to speak directly to you, who may be going through a moment where everything seems to be falling apart. You might look around and see no way out. Doors may have closed, and your strength may feel exhausted. But I want you to know something from the very start. Even when everything seems lost, God has the final word, and as long as He hasn't said it's over, your story isn't finished yet. Sometimes we feel invisible in the midst of our pain, thinking that heaven is silent. Yet God sees every tear, hears every prayer whispered in secret, and even if you don't understand the process, His purpose remains unshaken. Today I want to lead you to reflect on this powerful truth. No matter what your circumstances say or what others may think, when God decides to speak over your life, His word changes everything. Before we begin, I invite you to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it. When you do this, you help YouTube recommend this message to more people who may feel alone today and who can only find spaces like this to draw closer to God. Your small gesture can be a great blessing to someone else. I'd like you to write this phrase in the comments: God has the final word. This will be our declaration of faith today, a reminder that nothing is decided until He says so. When everything seems lost, the very first thing that begins to collapse is our perspective. We start seeing life through a foggy lens, clouded by fear and exhaustion. In those moments, it's crucial to remember a simple but powerful truth. Circumstances describe a moment. They don't define your destiny. The Bible is filled with stories where the scene appeared completely closed, yet God opened a way that no one imagined. It wasn't coincidence, it was purpose. Think of it this way. When you feel like you've reached the end of your rope, God is often just beginning to show that the rope has been held firmly in His hand all along. Look at the life of Joseph. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold as a slave, and later forgotten in a foreign prison. Humanly speaking, that chapter seemed final, hopeless. But the dream God planted in Joseph's heart didn't die in the darkness. It matured through the hardship. From the depths of the pit and the cold walls of prison, God was arranging meetings, timing, and opportunities that would eventually raise Joseph to a position of influence to save many lives. The lesson here is clear. A hostile environment doesn't cancel a divine calling, it refines it. Whenever you feel that your process has been too long, remember that one day of divine favor can accomplish in hours what years of effort never could. God's timing is never late. It aligns perfectly with His purpose. Think about the people of Israel standing before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army behind them. In front of them was an impossible wall of water. Behind them, a past that threatened to drag them back into slavery. Doesn't that sound familiar? The present feels blocked, the past is chasing you, and yet faith calls you to keep walking. God didn't tell them to look for another route. He showed them that He Himself would become the route. Where there was water, there appeared dry ground. Where there was panic, He gave direction. This scene teaches us that the last stretch before a miracle is often the noisiest and the hardest, but it's also the most revealing. When doubt whispers no, remind your heart that God's word still carries the final authority over what seems unchangeable. Now bring this to your own life. Perhaps a medical report spoke louder than your prayers, your bank account seems to scream, limit, a relationship has been broken, or that door of opportunity slammed shut. Or maybe it's not one big blow, but a series of small disappointments that have slowly drained the light from your spirit. In any of these situations, the key question is this: whose voice are you allowing to have the final word in your heart? If fear has the final word, you'll walk in invisible chains. If God has the final word, you'll start walking with peace even before anything changes on the outside. Biblical faith is not blindness. It's clear vision that looks beyond the immediate. It doesn't deny the storm, it trusts that there's a captain at the helm. I want to give you 3 very practical approaches to help this truth take root in your daily life. First, separate the fact from the interpretation. The fact is what happened. The interpretation is the meaning you give to it. The fact may be, I didn't get that job, but your interpretation doesn't have to be, I'm worthless. The fact may be, I was betrayed, but your interpretation doesn't have to be, no one will ever love me. Change the interpretation, and your heart gains room to breathe again. A simple practice. Write the fact on one line, and on the next line replace the toxic interpretation with a faith-anchored statement. For example, "Today didn't go as I hoped, but I trust God is still at work on my behalf." Try it consistently for 30 days and you'll see your perspective begin to shift. Second, learn to read the silence. God's silence doesn't mean abandonment. Often it means preparation. In David's life, there were silent years between the promise and the throne. In Hannah's story, silent years between her prayer and the child she longed for. In Abraham and Sarah's journey, years of silence between the promise and the laughter of its fulfillment. Silence is not absence. It's a classroom. What is learned there? Dependence, patience, resilience. If you're in a silent season right now, ask yourself what character trait God may be developing in you while you wait for the next step. The enemy will say, "Give up," but God is saying, "Endure with hope." Third, obey in the small things while waiting for the big answer. When Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes, there were hands that simply obeyed in handing out what seemed too little, and as they obeyed, the miracle unfolded. We often wait for a massive intervention and overlook the simple act of obedience today. That step might be as practical as waking up a little earlier to pray and clear your mind, offering forgiveness or asking for it, sending that application with excellence, learning a new skill, taking better care of your health, or putting your finances in order. Faith that waits also moves forward. Small obedience is the language by which we tell God, "I trust your final word." Let me leave you with an image. Picture a book with a chapter that's dark and painful. Maybe the main character falls, loses everything, cries bitterly. If you stop reading there, it looks like tragedy. But as you turn the page, you discover that the fall was the setup for a greater rise. Sometimes our lives feel like we're stuck in the middle of a painful chapter, but the author is still writing. Your job is not to snatch the pen. It's to stay available. Eyes open, heart willing, hands ready. Where others see a period, God often sees an unfinished sentence filled with purpose. Perhaps you say, "I've prayed and nothing has changed." I understand. But notice this. While you were praying, something began to change in you. You became more aware, more humble, more sensitive to His guidance. That inner transformation is the soil where the new season will grow. When the opportunity arrives, it will find you ready. That's another way God proves He has the last word. Not only by opening doors, but by shaping the person who will walk through them. If you're measuring your worth by a failure, remember Peter weeping after denying Jesus. That dark moment was not his final page. Later, the same man stood up with a bold heart and preached life to thousands. What changed? He accepted correction, received forgiveness, and kept moving forward. You are not your mistake when you fell, nor your fear when your voice trembles. You are a child of God, and the Father writes your story with ink that cannot be erased. Here's a small but powerful exercise for this week. Take a sheet of paper and make 3 columns. In the first column, write down the situation that makes you feel everything is lost. In the second, list any evidence, no matter how small, that God has sustained you so far. In the third, write 1 step of simple obedience you can take over the next 7 days. It could be modest, but do it intentionally. Place that sheet somewhere you can see it, and every evening note how God helped you through that day. This habit trains your eyes to see His hand in the ordinary, so that when the big breakthrough comes, you won't be caught unprepared. When life feels as though it's falling apart, we often assume that God has stepped back or gone silent. But what looks like abandonment is often the preparation stage that we can't yet perceive. One of the most comforting truths we can cling to is this: nothing is truly lost if it's still in God's hands. What appears to be the end of the story may in fact be the setting for a greater chapter yet to unfold. Think about Job. He lost everything: his wealth, his health, his children, even the support of his closest companion. To everyone around him, Job's life seemed over. Friends judged him, his wife urged him to give up. Yet Job held on to his faith. The book of Job reminds us that what looked like a final defeat became the stage for restoration. The pain wasn't evidence that God had abandoned him. It was the space where God's power would soon be revealed. In the end, God restored Job and blessed him with twice as much as he had before. That story teaches us that present pain does not mean God's absence. It can be the soil in which hope and strength begin to grow. The same is true for us. There are seasons when what we built with effort collapses unexpectedly. Relationships end, plans fail, doors close. It feels like loss and chaos, yet sometimes those things had to fall because they were never strong enough to carry the weight of the future God was preparing. God doesn't build on weak foundations. If He allowed something to come down, it's often because He plans to raise something stronger in its place. Another lesson we see in Scripture is the difference between asking "Why me?" and asking "What for?" The first question looks backward, keeping us stuck in pain. The second opens the door to meaning and growth, shifting your question from "Why did this happen?" to "What is God shaping in me through this?" can change your entire perspective. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives it purpose. Every struggle can become a teacher if you're willing to listen. Here are 3 guiding steps to help you walk through seasons that feel hopeless. First, acknowledge your limits, but don't limit God. Admitting that you cannot fix everything is not surrendering in defeat. It's confessing your need for His intervention. Joseph couldn't break out of prison by his own strength, yet God sent the right opportunity at the right moment. The Israelites couldn't part the Red Sea, but God divided the waters for them. A breakthrough often begins when you stop pretending you can do it all alone and let God show His strength. Second, resist making permanent decisions in temporary pain. Many people give up on dreams, relationships, or even their faith during moments of anguish, only to realize later that they were walking through a season, not a conclusion. It's like a traveler burning the map because the road became steep. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 31 reminds us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Waiting can be painful, but it often becomes the space where faith matures. Third, lift your voice again. Pain often pushes us into silence, convincing us that praying or speaking to God won't change anything. But Psalm 34 verse 17 says, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles." Silence before God is not the answer. Bringing your raw, honest cries to Him keeps hope alive and invites His peace to enter. Even a trembling voice carries power when it's lifted toward heaven. Let's pause to remember the story of Lazarus. After 4 days in the tomb, everyone, including his own sisters, believed it was too late. But Jesus showed that His authority is not limited by time or human expectation. Where others saw a sealed grave, He spoke life. This story proves that when God has the final word, no situation is too far gone for Him to transform. Bring this into your own life. Maybe it's a dream you buried years ago, a door that closed so hard it left you wounded, or a hope that feels long forgotten. If God truly has the last word, then nothing is beyond His reach. He may not bring it back in the exact way you imagine, but He will replace it with something better aligned with His plan for you. Remember, God doesn't always return what was lost. Often, He gives something greater and wiser. Here's a simple spiritual practice you can start tonight. Before you go to sleep, name aloud the situation you feel is beyond hope. Then say with faith, "Lord, even though I don't see the way forward, I trust that You have the final word over this." Do it for every area that feels broken or impossible. This isn't about reciting magic words. It's about training your heart to rest in the truth that your story is not over on the page you're staring at. One of the hardest battles we face when everything feels lost is the battle against despair. That inner voice begins to whisper that there's no point in trying again, that nothing will change, that the story is already over. But that voice is not the voice of truth, it's the echo of exhaustion. When exhaustion becomes the lens through which you see the world, your vision narrows, and all you can see is the pain of the present moment. God's perspective is always larger than the moment you're living, and learning to align your vision with His is the key to surviving the seasons of loss. Consider the Israelites during their long journey through the wilderness. For 40 years they walked across a barren land, seeing the same desert horizon day after day, enduring hunger, thirst, battles, and disappointment. At times, it must have felt as if their journey had no purpose at all. But what they saw as a meaningless detour was actually a season of preparation. God was teaching them trust, shaping their character, and proving His faithfulness step by step. The desert wasn't a mistake. It was the classroom that would prepare them to enter the Promised Land. If they had reached it too soon, they would not have been ready to sustain the blessing that waited for them. This teaches us a powerful lesson. A long and difficult process doesn't mean that God has forgotten you. It often means He is getting you ready for the answer you prayed for. Some doors, if opened too early, can become burdens instead of blessings. Waiting may feel like wasted time, but in God's plan, it's often a quiet investment into your strength and maturity. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." These words were given to a people living in exile, far from everything they loved. It's a reminder that God's promises are not limited by your location or your current season. His plans are not meant to trap you in pain, but to lead you toward a future of purpose, even if the path feels rough right now. But in seasons of struggle, the conversation you have with yourself is just as important as the one you have with God. Many people never rise after falling because they keep repeating words of defeat to themselves. The way you talk to your own soul in the dark can either weigh you down further or lift you up. That's why I encourage you to start every morning by speaking a short declaration of faith out loud, something like, "Today I choose to believe that God has the final word over my life." It may feel simple, but it's a powerful way to train your mind to look beyond what you see. Another principle for surviving these seasons is to avoid isolation. Pain often pushes us to withdraw and remain silent, but God often uses people to speak wisdom and comfort into our lives. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verse 9 reminds us, "Two are better than one, because if either of them falls, the other can lift him up." If you don't have a nearby church, reach out to a trusted friend, a mentor, or a community, even through this very channel, to hear words of encouragement. Sometimes the difference between despair and renewed hope is simply having another voice remind you that you're not alone. Fear of failure also tends to rise when things look lost. It convinces you that trying again will only lead to the same disappointment. Think of Joshua standing before the walls of Jericho. God's instructions were unusual. March around the city silently for 6 days, and then shout on the 7th day. It didn't make sense logically, but faith was never meant to be limited by logic. It was the simple act of obedience that brought those walls down. Fear will tell you not to try, but faith tells you to keep moving even when you don't understand every step. Here's a practical exercise for moments when anxiety and fear feel overwhelming. Write down the 3 worst-case scenarios your mind keeps imagining. Then, right beside each one, write down what God's word declares about you. For example, if your fear says, "I will never recover from this," place next to it Psalm 37 verse 5, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." Lining up your fears against Scripture teaches your heart to confront lies with truth. Perhaps you've prayed and still feel as though heaven is silent. Jesus spoke to this very experience in John chapter 13 verse 7. "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Some of God's works only make sense in hindsight. While you wait, worship can be your lifeline. In Acts chapter 16, we see Paul and Silas beaten and locked in chains, yet they chose to sing hymns in the midnight hour. The prison didn't open because of their strength, but their worship changed the atmosphere and led to their release. Worship in the midst of pain may not remove the problem immediately, but it shifts the weight off your shoulders and places it back in God's hands. Here's something practical you can try today. Find a quiet moment, turn off distractions, and make a simple gratitude list. Thank God for the smallest things: waking up today, the strength to keep going, a kind word you heard recently, even the fact that you're still standing despite the storm. Gratitude doesn't deny the pain. It reminds your soul that God's goodness hasn't disappeared, and that reminder will nourish your hope. Lastly, remember this: the worth of your life isn't determined by your current season. A seed buried in the soil looks lifeless, but it's in that hidden place that roots grow strong enough to sustain a tree. God sometimes allows us to feel buried, not to destroy us, but to anchor us for the growth that's coming. Don't mistake the dirt that surrounds you for a grave. It may be the ground where something new is about to spring forth. One of the most beautiful truths about the God of the Bible is that He never wastes our pain. Every hardship, every tear, every disappointment you've endured can be transformed into something meaningful when it's placed in His hands. What once felt like a weight dragging you down can become the very bridge that carries someone else toward hope. This means that what you're going through today is not only shaping you, but may also become a testimony that strengthens others tomorrow. Take Joseph again as an example. The betrayal by his brothers, the false accusations, the years in prison. Those moments could have left him bitter and broken. Instead, Joseph recognized the hand of God at work behind the pain. When he finally faced his brothers again, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." That is the power of perspective, seeing your suffering as part of a bigger story. When you surrender your wounds to God, they lose the power to define you and begin to equip you to bless others. Consider also the Apostle Paul. Few endured as much hardship as he did: shipwrecks, imprisonments, beatings, constant rejection. And yet, from prison cells came letters that continue to encourage and guide us centuries later. Paul's chains didn't silence him, they became the platform for his voice. This teaches us that your influence is not limited by your location or your circumstance. What matters is what you do with the place you're in right now. When life feels shattered, our first instinct is often to ask, "Why me?" But when that question shifts to, "How can God use this for something good?" the pain takes on purpose. This doesn't happen overnight. It begins with a decision of surrender. "Lord, I don't understand all this, but I trust you to bring something good out of it." Every time you choose trust over bitterness, healing begins to grow within you. Here's something practical to try. Make a list of the hardest seasons you've been through. Next to each one, write down the lessons you learned in those times and think about who might benefit from hearing your story. You'll be surprised at how many valuable insights were born out of your darkest moments. This exercise reminds you that you didn't come out of those trials empty-handed. You came out with wisdom, resilience, and compassion that can serve others. Isaiah chapter 61 verse 3 says that God gives a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. This is not just poetic language. It's a promise of transformation, that what was once a symbol of loss can become a testimony of restoration. Sharing your testimony isn't about showing off your strength. It's about pointing to the one who carried you through. Never underestimate the power of telling your story, even if you're still in the middle of it. Many people think they need to wait until everything is resolved before they speak up. But sometimes the most powerful testimony comes while you're still walking through the valley. It shows others that faith is not about having every answer. It's about trusting in the middle of the questions. King David's most heartfelt psalms were written in caves while he was hiding, not when he was sitting on the throne. That shows us that beauty can rise from broken places. If David had waited until he was comfortable to worship, we wouldn't have the songs that give us courage in our darkest nights. Your story, even unfinished, can bring light to someone else's shadow.